It's July 20th, 2026. Welcome to the video, everybody. Hope you're doing great wherever you're at. So tonight I want to talk about something that doesn't get nearly as much attention as the explosions and the bridges and the tanker footage, but might actually be the single most consequential thing the US military has done in this entire campaign. Over the last several nights, the United States has been systematically, deliberately dismantling Iran's entire coastal surveillance network, tower by tower, radar by radar, and in the process, it has effectively blinded the IRGC's ability to see what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran's response to losing its eyes on that coastline has been exactly what you'd expect from a regime that just lost the ability to track its own front yard. Fury, retaliation, and some genuinely disturbing rhetoric that I need to walk you through. Let's rewind, because this story has been building for over a week, and I want you to see the full picture of how Iran actually went blind. Let's start with the piece that I think tells this entire story in miniature. CENTCOM confirmed that it destroyed the Chabahar Shahid Kalantari port surveillance tower, and the way they described it matters more than the explosion itself. This wasn't some random structure. CENTCOM specifically said it was part of a maritime surveillance network along Iran's Gulf of Oman coastline that the IRGC has used for decades to attack ships in the strait. Decades. That tower, and the network it belonged to, wasn't built last year or even 10 years ago. It's part of the long-term architecture the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps built up over the better part of half a century specifically to give itself eyes on every vessel moving through one of the most important waterways on the planet. And in one strike, that piece of it went dark permanently. That wasn't an isolated hit. If you trace the target lists CENTCOM has been releasing night after night, coastal surveillance shows up over and over again, right alongside air defense sites, maritime capabilities, and missile and drone storage. Early in this renewed campaign, U.S. forces struck Iranian command centers, air defense sites, missile and drone capabilities, and coastal surveillance facilities, specifically to degrade Iran's ability to threaten innocent mariners crewing commercial vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. That same night, CENTCOM launched a 90-minute round of attacks on Greater Tunb Island, one of the small islands researchers have described as part of Iran's arch defense, the string of outposts and radar positions Iran has used to project surveillance and control over the strait for years. A few nights later, the target set had grown to include Iranian military command centers, air defense and coastal surveillance sites, maritime capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, and communications networks, all explicitly aimed at weakening Iran's ability to control that waterway. And in the most recent 8th night of strikes, CENTCOM again confirmed it, successfully hit Iranian military coastal surveillance and air defense facilities, maritime capabilities, and missile and drone storage sites, continuing to degrade Iran's overall military capability. Night after night, the word coastal surveillance keeps appearing on that list, and that repetition is not accidental. That is a deliberate, sustained campaign aimed at one specific outcome, taking away Iran's ability to see. And it's not just towers and fixed radar installations getting hit from the air. This war has introduced a genuinely new capability into the mix that deserves its own spotlight, because it's directly tied to this blinding campaign. For the first time in American combat history, the U.S. Navy deployed one-way attack sea drones, Corsair kamikaze vessels, that self-navigated toward the Iranian coast near Bandar Abbas and struck coastal targets directly, including a docked Iranian submarine sitting right at the naval base. These sea drones specifically targeted radar sites, missile batteries, and fast attack boat positions along the coastline, hunting down exactly the kind of surveillance infrastructure that gives the IRGC its situational awareness over the strait. Layer that on top of the two U.S. carriers operating in the region, the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS George H.W. Bush, launching stealth fighters, E-2 Hawkeye radar planes, and electronic attack aircraft that are actively jamming Iranian air defense and coastal surveillance networks in real time. And you start to understand just how comprehensive this blinding effort actually is. It's not one method. It's bombs, it's missiles, it's kamikaze sea drones, and it's electronic jamming, all working together to take away Iran's ability to see its own coastline. And here's the part that I think really drives home just how effective this has been. There's footage circulating of a 1,000-foot supertanker making a high-risk transit through the Strait of Hormuz at 1 o'clock in the morning under complete blackout conditions. All lights off. AIS and transponder switched off. Radio silenced. Moving through pre-cleared, mine-swept lanes, navigating entirely through encrypted channels. Think about what that actually means operationally. A massive 1,000-foot commercial vessel is able to move through the single most contested waterway on the planet. Completely dark, completely silent, precisely because the radar network that would normally be tracking every inch of that transit has been systematically destroyed. That's not a lucky break. That's the direct, tangible result of the coastal blinding campaign we've been watching unfold night after night. the US Navy didn't need to dominate the water itself to break Iran's ability to control or blockade the strait. It just needed to take away Iran's eyes. And once that happened, ships could start moving through routes that would have been suicide to attempt just weeks earlier. Now let's talk about the Mullahs being furious, because that part of the headline is not an exaggeration. It's exactly what Iran's own statements have shown us over the last several days. Iran hasn't just been absorbing these strikes quietly. It's been firing back constantly, hitting Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, and Oman in wave after wave of retaliation. And Iranian state media has been almost proud in how it describes those counterstrikes. Iran's military said in a statement that, in response to the repeated aggressions of the enemy, its forces targeted a U.S. ammunition depot at Al-Adiri camp and Patriot radar and air radar systems at the Ali al-Salam base in Kuwait. In an earlier round, the IRGC claimed it destroyed a U.S. air control radar in the northern Ghanim region and a maritime surveillance radar positioned on rocks in the Strait of Hormuz. It also claimed to have targeted U.S. monitoring assets in Oman, saying it destroyed a long-range aerial radar and a vessel detection radar there as well. Notice the pattern in what Iran keeps claiming to hit: radar, surveillance, detection systems. Iran is explicitly trying to blind the United States and its partners back, the same way its own coastline just got blinded, which tells you Tehran fully understands exactly what kind of capability it just lost and is desperately trying to even the playing field by taking out the equivalent American and allied assets. But it's the language coming out of the IRGC that I think really captures the fury in this headline. After claiming to have hit fighter jet shelters and a large aircraft parking ramp at a base in the Jordanian city of Al-Azraq, saying the attack completely destroyed at least 2 American fighter jets and caused significant damage to several others, Iran didn't stop at a battle damage claim. It went further and issued a direct call to the Jordanian military itself, urging Jordan's own army to turn on the American forces stationed on its own soil. The statement said, and I'm going to read this exactly as it was reported, "It is your religious and humanitarian duty to eliminate them by any means necessary and to cleanse the sacred land of Jordan of these killers of innocent Muslims." Read that again. That is Iran's military, in an official statement, calling on a sovereign nation's own armed forces to turn their weapons on American troops stationed there as guests of that government. That's not just retaliation anymore, that's incitement, aimed at trying to fracture a U.S. ally's own military from the inside. That tells you exactly how far Tehran is willing to go rhetorically. Once it starts losing ground it's held for decades. And Iran is losing ground in a very real, measurable way right now, well beyond just the surveillance towers. According to officials in the country, at least 50 people have been killed as a result of the strikes since July 6th, with 500 others wounded. Iran's own national water company confirmed that overnight attacks left roughly 10,000 people across 20 villages without water. A fire broke out at a power and water desalination plant in Kuwait after the latest round of Iranian retaliation. And just today, CENTCOM confirmed a U.S. service member was killed and another wounded during a controlled detonation of unexploded ordnance from a downed Iranian one-way attack drone in northern Iraq. That death brings the total number of American service members killed since this war began all the way to 17. 17. Every single one of those numbers, the 50 dead in Iran, the 10,000 without water, the 17 fallen Americans, is a direct consequence of a war that started over control of a shipping lane and has now expanded into a full-spectrum fight over infrastructure, surveillance, and territory across half the Gulf. Before we keep going, let's take a quick second, because staying sharp matters on nights when the story is this layered. In the cockpit, there was no room for a 2 p.m. crash, no room for brain fog. Every decision matters, and every second counts, and that's exactly why I built Max Burner Energy. Calm. It's the first fighter pilot-owned and operated energy drink company out there. I flew the F-15E in combat and F-16s on the Thunderbirds, so I know exactly what it takes to stay locked in when the stakes are real. Fighter jets don't have cup holders, so before a mission, I used to chug a regular energy drink and get hit with heartburn and a hard crash 30 minutes later, sometimes at 30,000 feet, which is genuinely the worst possible moment for that to happen. That's why I built Max Afterburner Energy, personally formulated to eliminate that crash completely. Natural caffeine, nootropics for focus, zero crash, zero junk, engineered to keep you locked in like a fighter pilot all day long. It's not just a drink, it's a system. The drinks are in production right now, merch is on the way too, so head over to Max Burner Energy. Join the free email list, and you'll be the first to know the second it all officially drops. Don't crash. Links in the description. All right, let's get back into it, because I want to walk through the full sequencing of how this blinding campaign actually built up over time, since it didn't happen in a single night. This entire renewed phase kicked off when Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps closed the Strait of Hormuz after firing on a commercial vessel, which collapsed the interim deal that had been holding since June and triggered a full U.S. response. From the very first nights, coastal surveillance and radar sites were already on the target list, alongside air defense systems, missile storage, and naval capabilities. As the campaign progressed, the target set widened to include the strike on Greater Tunba Island, one of Iran's key surveillance outposts guarding the strait, then command centers and communications networks, then bridges and logistics corridors connecting Bandar Abbas to the interior, and eventually the Chabahar surveillance tower itself, described by CENTCOM as part of a network the IRGC had relied on for decades. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy quietly introduced sea drones into combat for the first time, hunting radar and surveillance positions directly along the coastline, while carrier-based electronic attack aircraft jammed whatever systems survived the physical strikes. By the time we get to Night 8, with CENTCOM again confirming successful hits on Iranian coastal surveillance and air defense facilities, you're not looking at a series of disconnected strikes anymore. You're looking at the completion of a deliberate campaign that started with isolated radar sites and ended with entire stretches of Iran's coastline operating blind. You made it to the global roundup, my friend. A few more pieces worth knowing, because there's important context sitting just outside the main storyline. CNN reporting has captured an important analytical point from a regional expert named Azizi, who suggested that this pattern of intensifying strikes on infrastructure, combined with the systematic targeting of Revolutionary Guard radar installations and naval facilities, may extend beyond simply degrading Iran's ability to threaten shipping in the strait. Azizi's assessment is that Washington may actually view control of Iran's southern coastal strip as the only definitive, lasting solution to the broader Strait of Hormuz problem. That's a significant read, because it suggests this isn't just about winning individual nights of strikes. It's about permanently reshaping who controls visibility and access along that entire coastline going forward. Officials have also said this week that destroying targets like missile launchers and radar systems could be laying the groundwork for larger military operations that President Trump has reportedly been considering, which lines up with everything we've been tracking about deeper strikes pushing further into Iran's interior over the last several nights. You made it to the 40 chess strategic analysis section, my friends. So let's actually think through what it means, strategically, for a country to lose its coastal surveillance network in the middle of an active war, because I don't think people fully appreciate how fundamental this capability actually is. Radar and surveillance towers aren't offensive weapons in the traditional sense. They don't launch anything, they don't explode, they don't directly kill anyone, but they are the eyes that make every other weapon system Iran has actually usable. A cruise missile is useless against a moving tanker if you don't know where that tanker is. A fast attack boat can't ambush a commercial vessel if it doesn't have targeting data telling it where and when to strike. An anti-ship missile battery is just an expensive paperweight if it has no radar feeding it a firing solution. Everything the IRGC has used throughout this entire conflict to threaten commercial shipping, to fire on mariners, to try to hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage, depends entirely on having a functioning picture of what's moving through that water. Take away the surveillance network and you don't just weaken Iran's offense, you functionally disarm it, even if every missile and every boat is still sitting there intact. That's exactly why that supertanker was able to run a complete blackout transit through the strait in the middle of the night. It wasn't because Iran suddenly stopped wanting to control that waterway. It's because Iran, in that moment, genuinely could not see well enough to stop it. The ship went dark and Iran's coastal picture was already dark. Two blackouts overlapping, except only one side chose theirs on purpose. That single piece of footage tells you more about the real state of this war than almost any explosion clip could, because it shows the practical, tangible outcome of the blinding campaign in action. Not just the strikes themselves, but what those strikes actually accomplished operationally. Now, let's think about why Iran's response has escalated into the kind of language we saw directed at Jordan's own military. When a regime that has spent decades building a surveillance architecture along its coastline suddenly loses large pieces of it, in a matter of days, the psychological impact inside that regime's military and political leadership is enormous. This isn't just a battlefield setback, it's the loss of a strategic asset that took generations to build, one that formed the backbone of Iran's entire theory of how it could control the Strait of Hormuz without needing to match the United States ship for ship or jet for jet. When that asset disappears, the options left on the table shrink dramatically, and what you're often left with is exactly what we watched happen. Claims of destroying American radar systems in Kuwait and Oman, trying to inflict the same kind of blindness on the other side. And when even that doesn't restore the balance, you start to see rhetoric escalate into the kind of incitement we saw aimed at Jordan's military, an attempt to open up an entirely new front by turning a host nation's own forces against the Americans stationed there, because Tehran's conventional options for regaining the initiative on the water are running out. Here's the strategic read on where this actually leaves things tonight. Iran built a coastal surveillance network over decades specifically to give itself leverage over one of the most important waterways on Earth. Over the last several nights, that network has been dismantled piece by piece, through airstrikes, through sea drones, striking coastal targets directly, through electronic jamming from carrier-based aircraft, and through the destruction of towers that had operated for generations. Every claim Iran has made about hitting American and allied radar systems in return tells you Tehran understands exactly what it just lost and is racing to inflict the same wound elsewhere. Every piece of increasingly desperate rhetoric, from urging Jordan's army to turn on American forces to the broader pattern of widening retaliation across Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman, tells you this is a regime that is furious not just because it's taking losses, but because it just lost the ability to see the one thing it built its entire regional strategy around controlling. What do you guys think happens next? Do you think Iran manages to rebuild any meaningful coastal surveillance capability while these strikes keep coming night after night? Or is that network permanently gone for the duration of this war? Do you think Jordan's military response to that incitement statement changes anything about how deep this conflict spreads into the region? And do you think Azizi's read is right? That Washington's real objective here has shifted toward long-term control of Iran's southern coastal strip, rather than just degrading capability night by night? Let me know what you think happens next in the comments below. I'd genuinely love to read your take on this one. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Go check out MaxBurnerEnergy.com. Join the free email list, and you'll get updates the moment the energy drinks and the merch officially launch, plus a weekly roundup so you never miss a beat of what's actually happening on the ground in this conflict.